The training room fell silent. 300 Navy SEALs watched as the female officer hit the floor. Colonel Reinhardt looming over her with that infamous smirk. He'd made examples of candidates before, but she wasn't a candidate. As his hand shot toward her face in a practiced intimidation move, something changed. Her eyes narrowed in a blur of movement too quick to follow. She caught his wrist. One twist, one precise application of pressure. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the facility. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. And in that moment, every person in the room realized they had gravely misunderstood exactly who she was. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, consider subscribing for more tales of underestimated individuals who prove their worth when it matters most. Naval Special Warfare Training Command. Coronado emerged from the morning mist like a fortress. A crisp autumn breeze carried the scent of salt water across the grounds as Commander Astrid Clave stepped from the government sedan. She wore civilian attire, charcoal slacks, and a navy blazer with only a small duffel bag and manila envelope marking her arrival. No fanfare, no welcome committee. Exactly as she preferred it. Lieutenant Bryson Adler approached with the stiff formality of someone executing an unwanted assignment. He was young, likely fresh from officer training, with a regulation haircut and an expression caught between curiosity and discomfort. "Commander Clave, I'm to escort you to Colonel Reinhardt's office," he said, eyes flickering to her transfer papers, then back to her face, searching for something that might explain the classified nature of her reassignment. "Lead the way, Lieutenant," Astrid responded, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made Adler stand slightly straighter. They walked through the heart of the training facility, passing groups of SEAL candidates, executing drills with mechanical precision. Conversations paused as they passed. Instructors glanced over, their expressions guarded. Candidates stole curious looks between exercises. Astrid observed everything. Form corrections needed on the firing range, inefficient movement patterns during an extraction exercise, but kept her observations to herself. The facility hummed with the disciplined energy of elite warfare training. Men pushed themselves beyond conventional limits, their faces etched with determination despite obvious exhaustion. Instructors barked commands, their voices carrying across the grounds with practiced authority. In the administration building, Colonel Thaddeus Reinhardt barely rose from his desk when she entered. His handshake was pre-functor, his smile never reaching his eyes. At 6 feet 2 inches with a frame that still carried the muscle memory of decades of special operations, he dominated the room through physical presence alone. "Commander," he said, gesturing to a chair while returning to his imposing leather seat. "I've reviewed what parts of your file aren't redacted into oblivion." He tapped a folder with visible frustration. Pentagon bureaucracy at its finest. Astrid said nothing, waiting. Reinhardt studied her with barely concealed contempt. Her service photo showed a woman in her late 30s, brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, hazel eyes revealing nothing. Despite her commander rank, something about her presence failed to register as significant to him. Just another administrator sent to complicate his command. "You're here to observe and report on training efficiency metrics," Reinhardt continued, making air quotes. Whatever that means, his eyes narrowed slightly. "What it means to me is that someone up the chain has concerns about my command. I'm simply here to execute my orders, Colonel." Astrid responded neutrally. Reinhardt leaned forward. "This is the most elite combat training facility in the world. These men endure hell to earn their trident. What exactly qualifies a desk officer to evaluate SEAL training protocols?" Astrid met his gaze without defensiveness. "I respect the work done here, Colonel. My role is observation, not interference. See that it stays that way." He slid a visitor's badge across the desk. "Lieutenant Adler will show you to your quarters and restricted areas of access." As Astrid rose to leave, a slight adjustment in her gait revealed a nearly imperceptible limp. Reinhardt noticed, but misinterpreted it as physical weakness rather than the souvenir of service it truly was. "One more thing, Commander," Reinhardt called as she reached the door. "My men have earned their place here." Until you've faced what they have, I suggest maintaining a very low profile. Astrid turned slightly, the morning light catching a thin scar running along her neck, the only visible response to his challenge. 3 weeks later, Astrid had become a ghost in the facility, omnipresent yet somehow invisible, methodically documenting training procedures from the periphery. She spoke only when addressed directly, offered no unsolicited opinions, and maintained professional distance from everyone. Her quarters remained Spartan, as if she expected to leave at a moment's notice. Yet, patterns were emerging. SEAL candidates had begun noticing her subtle head tilts when they executed techniques incorrectly, sometimes adjusting their form before instructors could criticize them. During night exercises, they observed her watching, not with the academic interest of an administrator, but with the calculated assessment of someone intimately familiar with combat operations. In the cafeteria, Astrid sat alone, picking at a meal while reviewing notes on her tablet. At a nearby table, 2 instructors spoke just loudly enough for her to hear. "Pentagon oversight," said one, sneering. "Next, they'll send floaties for the swimming qualification." His companion laughed. "Heard she's writing efficiency reports, probably counting paper clips and worrying about our carbon footprint." Astrid continued eating, seemingly oblivious to their commentary, though nothing escaped her notice. She had long ago learned that being underestimated was often advantageous. Colonel Reinhardt entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. He surveyed the room before approaching the instructors, clearly aware of Astrid nearby. "How's Delta Squad progressing?" he asked loudly. 2 drops yesterday, sir. Carrington couldn't complete the underwater stress test. Mental weakness. Reinhardt nodded approvingly. "Weed out the vulnerability early. That's what keeps men alive downrange." His eyes drifted deliberately toward Astrid. "Some people will never understand what it takes to forge real warriors." The intended message was clear. Astrid gathered her materials and exited without acknowledgement. Later that afternoon, during a particularly brutal training simulation, candidates executing tactical maneuvers after 48 sleepless hours, an instructor pushed too far. Petty Officer Davenport collapsed, showing signs of severe hypothermia beyond the safety parameters. When the supervising instructor hesitated, Astrid stepped forward. "Terminate the exercise," she stated firmly. "His core temperature is critical," the instructor bristled. "With respect, ma'am, this isn't your call." Vestibular disorientation, degraded motor function, slurred speech. Astrid interrupted, already moving toward the candidate. "He's well past training threshold and approaching medical emergency." She knelt beside the shivering man, quickly checking his pulse with practiced precision. "Get me a thermal blanket and establish a warming protocol. Monitor for shock indicators and prepare for possible medevac." The clinical authority in her voice spurred immediate action. As emergency procedures commenced, Master Chief Lazaro Quintonia watched Astrid with newfound interest. Unlike Reinhardt, Quintonia had spent enough time in forward operating environments to recognize the subtle indicators of someone with extensive field experience. Later, as she documented the incident, Quintinilla approached. "Those were combat medic protocols you used earlier, not standard first aid." Astrid continued typing. "Basic field medicine." "No," Quintonia said quietly. "That was CSR extraction protocol for compromised operators." He hesitated before asking, "Were you with Task Force Obsidian in the Strait?" Astrid's fingers paused over a keyboard. Her eyes met his with a warning clarity that silenced further questions. From across the training yard, Colonel Reinhardt observed this exchange, his jaw tightening. That night, he made several calls to Pentagon contacts seeking access to Astrid's complete service record. Each attempt met the same response. "That information exceeds your clearance level, Colonel." His frustration grew with each denial. By morning, his determination to reassert control over his command had hardened into resolution. The next day, Astrid continued her observations, noting the subtle changes in how some instructors now interacted with her. There was a new weariness in their manner, particularly from those with special operations backgrounds. They recognized something in her that Reinhardt refused to see. During a tactical briefing, she noticed Master Chief Quintinia studying her when he thought she wasn't looking. His expression wasn't hostile like Reinhardt's, but evaluative, as if reassessing a complex tactical problem. After the briefing, Astrid reviewed personnel files of select candidates who had demonstrated exceptional adaptability under pressure. Her notations were precise, clinical, but focused on qualities rarely emphasized in standard evaluations. Creative problem solving under extreme stress, intuitive threat assessment, emotional stability in chaotic environments. Colonel Reinhardt's voice interrupted her work. Interesting reading, Commander. Astrid closed the file. Standard review. You seem particularly interested in certain candidates, Reinhardt observed, his tone casual, but his intent probing. Any specific metrics catching your attention? Just thoroughness, Colonel, she replied. Of course. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm conducting a full command demonstration tomorrow. Combat Training Arena at 0800. Your attendance is expected. I'll be there. Reinhardt lingered, clearly wanting to provoke a more substantive reaction. When none came, he added, perhaps we'll finally get to see what the Pentagon values in its administrative personnel these days. After he left, Astrid reopened her files, her expression unchanged. Only the slightest tension in her fingers suggested she understood perfectly what Reinhardt was planning. That evening, as most personnel retired to quarters, Astrid made a secure call from a private location, speaking in coded language that would have been meaningless to anyone overhearing. The conversation was brief, efficient. Assessment period concluding ahead of schedule, she reported. Potential extraction of 6 candidates, preparing for accelerated timeline. The voice on the other end acknowledged without question, trusting her judgment implicitly. Support assets on standby, Nightshade protocol authorized. Astrid ended the call and stared at the facility's lights in the distance. For weeks, she had maintained her cover perfectly, allowing Reinhardt and others to see only what they expected to see. A Pentagon bureaucrat, a desk officer, someone to dismiss and disregard. Tomorrow would change that calculation one way or another. In her quarters, she methodically prepared for the coming day, reviewing files of the candidates she had selected and finalizing her reports. The small scar on her neck caught the light as she moved, one of many physical reminders of operations the personnel here couldn't begin to imagine. Operations that had saved countless lives, but would never appear in any record accessible to someone like Reinhardt. When sleep finally came, it was the light, vigilant rest of someone who had learned to remain partially alert even in unconsciousness, a skill acquired through years of operations in environments where a moment's inattention meant death. Morning arrived with military precision. Astrid dressed in her standard uniform. Nothing to suggest this day would differ from any before it. But as she clipped the satellite phone to her belt and felt its reassuring weight, she knew that her time in the shadows at Naval Special Warfare Command was about to end. The combat training arena hummed with controlled energy as personnel assembled for the demonstration. 300 SEAL candidates arranged themselves in formation, bodies held with disciplined stillness. Instructors positioned themselves at precise intervals, occasionally making minor corrections to the formation's alignment. Senior officers gathered on the raised observation platform, exchanging quiet observations about the candidates' progress. Astrid entered without fanfare, taking her customary position at the periphery. She noted the unusual attendance. Typically, such demonstrations involved only the specific training group. Yet today, every available candidate and instructor was present. Colonel Reinhardt's intent was becoming clearer. Master Chief Quintanilla approached as she settled into position. Full house today, he commented, his tone carefully neutral. Indeed, Astrid replied, her eyes continuing to scan the assembly. Colonel has been unusually focused on preparation for this demonstration, Quintanilla added, watching her reaction closely. Astrid met his gaze evenly. I imagine he has. A brief nod passed between them, unspoken communication between professionals who recognized the currents moving beneath the surface. Quintanilla returned to his position as Colonel Reinhardt entered the arena. Reinhardt moved with the confident authority of a man on his own terrain, acknowledging salutes and exchanging brief words with senior staff. His uniform was impeccable, his bearing commanding. When he reached the center of the training floor, the entire facility fell silent without any explicit order. "Gentlemen," his voice carried effortlessly across the space. "Today's demonstration will focus on advanced close-orders combat techniques, specifically threat neutralization in confined environments. For 30 minutes, instructors guided selected candidates through progressively complex scenarios. Reinhardt offered occasional commentary, emphasizing points about muscle memory, tactical advantage, and psychological control. Throughout the demonstrations, his eyes periodically found Astrid, gauging her reaction. She remained expressionless, taking occasional notes. As Master Chief Quintanilla concluded the preliminary demonstrations, Colonel Reinhardt stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Before we proceed to team exercises," he announced, scanning the assembly, "I'd like to address something that's been on my mind." His eyes found Astrid in her usual position at the periphery. "Commander Clave has been with us for several weeks now, evaluating our methods and protocols." A ripple of tension passed through the formation. In the spirit of mutual professional development, perhaps the commander would honor us by sharing her expertise. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Commander, would you join me, center floor?" A hush fell over the arena as all eyes turned to Astrid. After a measured pause, she walked calmly to the center, her face betraying nothing. She moved with the economical grace of someone accustomed to maintaining complete bodily control in high-pressure situations. "Commander Clave has been tasked with improving our training efficiency," Reinhardt continued, circling her slowly. "I thought it might benefit our candidates to understand her perspective on combat readiness." Astrid stood at parade rest, eyes forward. "Cannell," Master Chief Quintanilla began, something cautionary in his tone. "At ease, Master Chief." Reinhardt cut him off. "This is a valuable teaching opportunity." He turned back to Astrid. "Commander, perhaps you could explain your thoughts on our close quarters defense protocols." "The protocols are sound," Astrid evenly. "Your instructors are well qualified." "High praise," Reinhardt said with thinly veiled sarcasm. "But I'm curious about application." He moved closer. "In your administrative experience, how would you handle an aggressor who invades your personal space?" The question hung in the air, its challenge unmistakable. "That would depend on the threat assessment, sir," Astrid replied. "Let's create a scenario then," Reinhardt continued, now standing directly before her. "Standard demonstration. I'll play aggressor. You demonstrate a basic defensive position." Without waiting for her agreement, he began explaining to the candidates. "Notice the position of power. Control is established through stance, proximity, and psychological dominance." As he spoke, he deliberately moved into Astrid's personal space, a textbook intimidation technique. The candidates watched intently as their commanding officer demonstrated dominance over the outsider who'd been evaluating them. The untrained individual typically responds with one of three instinctive reactions. Reinhardt continued, his voice carrying throughout the arena: retreat, freeze, or ineffective resistance. He raised his hand suddenly near Astrid's face, not striking, but making a sharp, aggressive gesture designed to trigger a flinch response. What happened next occurred too quickly for most observers to fully process. Astrid's hand intercepted his wrist mid-motion. In one fluid sequence, she redirected his momentum, executed a perfect joint manipulation, and applied precisely calibrated pressure to the ulnar stress point. The sharp crack of breaking bone echoed through the silent facility. Reinhardt dropped to one knee, his face contorted in pain and shock. Astrid maintained the control hold just long enough to establish complete dominance before professionally releasing him and stepping back to regulation distance. No one moved. No one spoke. 300 witnesses remained frozen in collective disbelief. The silence was broken by a distinctive electronic tone. A satellite phone in Astrid's pocket signaled an incoming secure transmission. Still maintaining perfect composure, She removed it and answered. Nightshade confirmed, she said into the device, her eyes never leaving Reinhardt. Whatever she heard transformed her posture subtly, an almost imperceptible shift from administrative observer to something entirely different. She pocketed the phone and looked directly at Master Chief Quintinia. Assemble Tactical Response Team Sigma, she ordered with quiet authority. The Tarvo cell is active. Without hesitation, Quintinilla snapped to attention. Yes, Commander. The entire arena watched this exchange in stunned silence, the paradigm shifting before their eyes. Two medics rushed forward to attend to Colonel Reinhardt, who remained kneeling, cradling his broken arm. His face had drained of color, a combination of physical pain and the dawning realization that he had catastrophically miscalculated the situation. Astrid turned to the senior officer present on the observation deck. Captain Whitman, I need secure communications established in the command center immediately. Authorization code Echo November 97 Tango Sierra. Captain Whitman's eyebrows rose slightly at the Heil clearance code, but he nodded sharply. Right away, Commander Astrid addressed the stunned assembly. This facility is now operating under National Security Directive 22771. All regularly scheduled training is suspended. Master Chief Quintinia will provide further instructions to designated personnel. As she spoke, 6 armed security officers entered the arena, positioning themselves at strategic points around the perimeter, not threatening, but clearly establishing a new security protocol. What the hell is going on? Reinhardt managed through gritted teeth as the medics helped him to his feet. Astrid met his gaze coolly. That information is above your clearance level, Colonel. She turned away, already focused on the developing situation that had prompted the secure call. Master Chief Quintinilla approached her, his manner now completely transformed. Gone was any hint of the cautious evaluation. In its place was the crisp efficiency of a senior operator addressing a commanding officer. Commander, which candidates are you selecting? He asked quietly. Astrid handed him a data pad. These 6. Have them report to Briefing Room Alpha in 30 minutes with full kit. Yes, ma'am. Quintinilla examined the list, nodding slightly. May I note that your selections align exactly with my own recommendations had I been asked. I'm aware, Master Chief. That's partly why you're being activated as tactical advisor. A ghost of a smile crossed Quintinilla's face. Understood, Commander. As personnel began executing her orders with increasing urgency, Astrid strode toward the command center. Satellite phone already reconnected to secure command. Nightshade actual. She spoke into the device. Confirm intelligence on Tarvo's movement. Preparing response team now. Captain Whitman fell into step beside her. Commander, Admiral Hargrove is en route from Pentagon Liaison Office. ETA 40 minutes. Good. We'll need her clearance for the resource allocation. Astrid glanced at him. I assume you have questions, Captain. Several dozen, ma'am, but they can wait. Whatever's happening seems considerably more important than Colonel Reinhardt's broken arm. Considerably, Astrid confirmed. In the medical bay, Colonel Reinhardt sat rigid with fury and pain as doctors stabilized his fractured ulna. I want that woman in custody immediately, he demanded of his executive officer. Sir, that may be difficult, the officer replied cautiously. Commander Clave appears to be operating under direct Pentagon authority. Captain Whitman has validated her security credentials. What credentials? She's a desk jockey sent to evaluate training protocols. Apparently not, sir. Her actual clearance level is significantly higher than initially indicated. Reinhardt's face darkened. Find out who she is now. Yes, sir. Left alone briefly as medical staff prepared for further treatment, Reinhardt struggled to process what had happened. The woman who had spent weeks quietly observing his command had just incapacitated him with a technique he'd only seen executed by Tier 1 operators. More disturbing was how Quintinilla and now Whitman had instantly deferred to her authority once that satellite phone had activated. Who exactly was Commander Astrid Clave? In the command center, Astrid stood before a secure display showing satellite imagery and intelligence feeds. 6 SEAL candidates, now revealed as handpicked for their specific skill sets, listened intently as she briefed them on a developing situation. Tarvos is a splinter cell that emerged from the remains of a dismantled terrorist network, she explained, indicating movement patterns on the digital map. 18 hours ago, they acquired materials consistent with a radiological dispersal device. Our window for interdiction is closing rapidly. Technical specifications displayed on a secondary screen. These components suggest a sophisticated triggering mechanism, Commander, beyond typical terrorist capabilities. Correct, Lieutenant. That's why you're here. The cell has acquired outside expertise. Another candidate, Enan Ramirez, exceptional in urban infiltration techniques, pointed to a structural schematic. These access points are highly restricted. How recent is our intelligence on guard rotations? 6 hours, Astrid replied. We Bunk LL have updated patterns before insertion. As the briefing continued, Master Chief Quintanilla observed silently from the periphery, increasingly impressed with both Astrid's comprehensive command of the operational details and the candidates' adaptive responses. These were not men being asked to execute standard training exercises. They were being integrated into a legitimate high-stakes operation with potential national security implications. Outside the command center, the facility continued its rapid transformation. Security protocols elevated, communications were restricted, and personnel movements controlled. The training facility had become an operational staging ground in a matter of minutes. Admiral Aller Hargrove arrived precisely on schedule, moving briskly through security checkpoints until she reached the medical bay. Colonel Reinhardt, his arm now properly set and immobilized, stood as she entered. Admiral, he began immediately, I demand an explanation for Commander Saleh's actions and immediate disciplinary procedures for assault on a superior officer. Admiral Hargrove regarded him coolly. Sit down, Colonel. Something in her tone compelled his compliance despite his rage. I understand you've had a difficult morning, she said, taking the seat across from him. Let me clarify your current situation. Reinhardt waited, jaw clenched. Commander Astrid Clave is not an administrative officer sent to evaluate your training protocols. Harov's voice was measured, deliberate. She commands Joint Special Operations Task Force Delta 9, one of our most classified counterterrorism units. For the past decade, her team has been responsible for preventing 3 major terrorist attacks on American soil and neutralizing numerous high-V value targets overseas. Reinhardt stared at her, comprehension slowly dawning. What? Hargrove sighed, folding her hands on the table between them. Her reassignment here wasn't punishment, Colonel. It was purpose. Delta 9 needs new operators with specialized skills. She was evaluating candidates for recruitment. That's impossible. Her file indicated administrative service. Her cover file, yes, her actual service record remains classified well above your clearance level. Harov's expression softened slightly. The Myanmar operation that's partially redacted in that file you saw. She extracted 14 hostages and eliminated an entire terrorist cell after her team was compromised. She carried 2 wounded men through jungle terrain for 17M with a shrapnel wound in her own leg. Reinhardt processed this information in stunned silence, the pain in his arm suddenly insignificant compared to the weight of his error. Commander Clave wasn't sent here because she failed, Colonel Hargrove continued. She was sent here because we need more operators like her. And right now, she's mobilizing to prevent what could be a significant threat to national security. The medical bay buzzed with controlled chaos. Colonel Reinhardt sat on an examination table, his broken arm being stabilized as medical personnel worked efficiently around him. His face remained locked in a mask of fury and humiliation. The events in the training arena replaying relentlessly in his mind. With each passing minute, his anger crystallized into resolve. Someone would answer for this unprecedented breakdown in military protocol. The doors swung open as Admiral Era Hargrove strode in, her presence immediately commanding attention. At 58, Hargrove carried herself with a poised authority that came from decades navigating the highest echelons of naval command. Her salt and pepper hair was cropped short, her uniform immaculate, her expression revealing nothing. With a sharp gesture, she dismissed everyone except Reinhardt. "Leave us," she ordered. When the last corpsman exited, she turned to Reinhardt. "Well, Thaddeus, you really stepped in at this time. That woman assaulted a superior officer." Reinhardt seethed through clenched teeth. "I want her in custody pending court-martial proceedings." Admiral Hargrove's expression remained impassive. "That won't be happening. With all due respect, Admiral, you just publicly assaulted the director of our most classified counterterrorism unit." Hargrove interrupted. "Consider yourself fortunate that a broken arm is all you're dealing with." Reinhardt stared at her, comprehension slowly dawning. "What are you talking about?" Hargrove sighed, pulling a chair closer. "Commander Astrid Klav commands Joint Special Operations Task Force Delta 9. For the past decade, her unit has been responsible for preventing 3 major terrorist attacks on American soil and neutralizing numerous high value targets overseas." She leveled a steady gaze at him. "Her reassignment here wasn't punishment, Colonel. It was purpose. Delta 9 needs new operators with specialized skills. She was evaluating candidates for recruitment." Reinhardt processed this information in stunned silence. The pain medication clouding his thoughts just enough to make him doubt what he was hearing. "The Myanmar operation that's partially redacted in her file," Hargrove continued. "She extracted 14 hostages and eliminated an entire terrorist cell after her team was compromised. She carried 2 wounded men through jungle terrain for 17 with a shrapnel wound in her own leg." The Admiral stood, straightening her uniform. "Commander Clave wasn't sent here because she failed, Colonel. She was sent here because we need more operators like her. And right now, she's mobilizing to prevent what could be a significant threat to national security." Reinhardt struggled to reconcile this information with a quiet, seemingly unremarkable officer who had spent weeks observing his command. "Why wasn't I briefed? This is my facility. Operational security," Hargrove replied simply. "The fewer people who knew her actual purpose, the better. Even I was only briefed on the broad strokes of her mission parameters." "And the incident just now," Reinhardt gestured to his immobilized arm. Hargrove's expression hardened slightly. "That was your own doing, Colonel. You created a public confrontation with an operator whose hand-to-hand combat qualifications exceed most Special Forces instructors. What exactly did you expect to happen?" Before Reinhardt could respond, Captain Whitman entered after a pre-functor knock. "Admiral, Commander Clave requests your presence in the command center. The situation is developing rapidly." "On my way." Hargrove turned back to Reinhardt. "Once you're medically cleared, report to me. Your facility is now a forward operating base for the next 12 hours. I expect your full cooperation." She left without waiting for a response, leaving Reinhardt to confront the magnitude of his misjudgment in solitude. In the command center, monitors displayed tactical information, satellite imagery, and communication streams. Astrid stood at the central table, directing preparations with calm efficiency. The 6 selected SEAL candidates, now operating as probationary members of her task force, moved with focused purpose, each assigned to specific preparation tasks aligned with their specialized skills. Admiral Hargrove entered and moved directly to Astrid's side. "Brief me," she said without preamble. "Tarvocell has accelerated their timeline," Astrid reported. "Intelligence confirms they've assembled the primary components for a radiological dispersal device. Target is likely the naval station itself, given the symbolic value and population density." Hargrove studied the intelligence summary on the nearest screen. Insertion plan. 2-team approach. Alpha Team creates diversion at their suspected secondary location, while Bravo executes primary infiltration at the main compound. Master Chief Quinton EIA will coordinate tactical support from here with the base security elements. Timeline. Wheels up in 40 minutes. We've identified a 3-hour window before the device could potentially be transported to the target location. Hargrove nodded, trusting Astrid's assessment implicitly. Resources. Everything we need is here. The candidates I've selected have precisely the skill sets required for this operation. Speaking of which, Hargrove glanced toward the 6 men who continued their preparations. How did they respond to this rather sudden promotion? A ghost of a smile crossed Astrid's face. Like professionals, Admiral, they've been training their entire careers for exactly this kind of scenario, whether they knew it or not. And Reinhardt will survive, though his ego may take longer to heal than his arm. Hargrove suppressed a smile. I've ordered him to assist once he's cleared by medical. His knowledge of the local area could be valuable. Astrid nodded, returning her attention to the operational plans. The brief moment of levity passed as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the focused intensity required for the mission ahead. 30 minutes later, Colonel Reinhardt entered the command center, his arm immobilized in a professional cast and sling. The painkillers had worn off enough for clarity, but not enough to entirely dull the throbbing reminder of his earlier encounter. He paused just inside the doorway, taking in the transformed environment. What had been a standard military command center that morning was now a sophisticated tactical operations hub. Personnel moved with the synchronized efficiency of a unit that had worked together for years, not the hastily assembled group he knew them to be. At the center of it all stood Commander Clave, issuing directives with quiet authority that inspired immediate compliance. Reinhardt approached cautiously, hyper-aware of the dramatic reversal in their respective positions. ADM Hargrove said you could use my assistance, he said, keeping his tone carefully neutral. Astrid looked up from the tactical display, assessing him briefly before nodding. We need detailed information on these access points. She indicated several locations on the base schematic. Security protocols, traffic patterns, anything that might not appear in standard documentation. Reinhardt studied the indicated areas. These are restricted zones, even for most base personnel. What exactly are we dealing with? Terrorist cell with radiological materials. Astrid replied efficiently. Intelligence suggests they've infiltrated peripheral base security with the intent to deploy a dirty bomb likely targeting the main naval personnel center. The clinical detachment in her voice, as she described a potentially catastrophic attack, struck Reinhardt forcefully. This was not the language of an administrator, but of a combat operator who had faced similar threats before. These access points have biometric security, he offered, focusing on the mission rather than the lingering discomfort of their altered dynamic. But there's a maintenance override protocol that cycles every 6 hours. Astrid nodded to one of her selected candidates, Lieutenant Mercer Reinhardt recognized, who immediately began integrating this information into what appeared to be an infiltration plan. For the next 20 minutes, Reinhardt provided detailed insights about the base's security vulnerabilities. Gradually recognizing the sophisticated nature of the operation Astrid had assembled on such short notice, her team moved with practiced precision, adapting their plans fluidly as new intelligence arrived through secure channels. As final preparations concluded, Astrid addressed her team. Transport is ready. Final equipment check and comm test. We move in 5. The 6 selected operators performed their final preparations with methodical efficiency. Reinhardt watched them with a mixture of professional admiration and lingering disbelief. These were men he had personally overseen through training. Yet they now operated at a level beyond standard SEAL protocols under Astrid's command. As the team moved toward the exit, Reinhardt found himself speaking before he had fully formed the thought. Commander Clave. Astrid paused, turning toward him with neutral expectation. Your team is well prepared, he said, the closest approximation to an apology he could manage in the moment. Good hunting. Something flickered briefly in her eyes, recognition of the professional acknowledgement beneath his words. She gave a slight nod before turning to lead her team from the command center. For hours later, the operation had concluded with textbook precision. The Tarbo cell had been neutralized, the radiological materials secured, and all team members had returned without significant injury. In the command center, Admiral Hargrove reviewed the preliminary after-action reports with evident satisfaction. Clean operation, she commented to Astrid. Your assessment of the candidates was spot on, particularly Ramirez's improvisation at the north entrance. He showed that same adaptive thinking in training scenarios, Astrid replied. It's why he was on my short list from week 1. Reinhardt, who had remained in the command center throughout the operation, providing occasional insights on local security responses, found himself re-evaluating every interaction he'd had with Commander Clave over the past weeks. What he had interpreted as passive observation had been active assessment. What he had dismissed as administrative detachment had been professional focus. As the command center began the process of standing down from emergency operations, Astrid approached him. Colonel, a word. They moved to a quieter corner of the room. For a moment, neither spoke, the events of the day hanging between them like an undetonated explosive. Your insight on the security protocols was valuable, Astrid said finally. It contributed directly to the operation's success. Reinhardt nodded, accepting the professional acknowledgement for what it was. I've clearly misjudged many things about your presence here, Commander. Understandable. That was the point of my cover. Even so, he glanced at his immobilized arm. I created an unnecessary confrontation based on incorrect assumptions. We all work with the information we have, Astrid replied, neither accepting nor rejecting his implied apology. What matters is how we adapt when that information changes. The next morning dawned clear and bright over the Naval Special Warfare Training Command. Word had spread throughout the facility, not the classified details of the operation, but enough for personnel to understand that something significant had occurred and that Commander Clave was not who they had initially believed her to be. On the training grounds, Astrid oversaw the loading of equipment onto a waiting transport helicopter. Her 6 selected SEAL candidates, now officially designated as probationary members of Task Force Delta 9, received final briefing from Master Chief Quintanilla nearby. The remainder of the command had formed an impromptu line of respect leading to the aircraft. No one had ordered this formation. It had materialized organically as word spread throughout the facility overnight. Astrid approached the helicopter, acknowledging the silent tribute with subtle nods. When she reached Master Chief Quintanilla, he presented her with a ceremonial SEAL trident. We know you already earned one of these, he said quietly, but the men wanted you to have this one as a token of respect. Astrid accepted it with genuine appreciation, the first real emotion she had displayed during her entire time at the facility. Thank you, Master Chief. Your assessment of the candidates was invaluable. I couldn't have selected better myself. I think you did select better, Commander. Quintanilla smiled slightly. Those 6 have always shown exceptional potential. You just saw it more clearly than the rest of us. As she prepared to board, a figure approached from the administration building. Colonel Reinhardt, his arms still immobilized in a cast and sling, walked deliberately toward her. The assembled personnel tensed, uncertain what to expect. Reinhardt stopped at regulation distance. For a moment, he simply studied her face, seeing for the first time what he'd refused to recognize before. Then, with his good arm, he rendered a precise, respectful salute. Your team is ready, Commander, he said formally. And if you find yourself in need of additional personnel for future operations, this command stands ready to assist. Astrid returned the salute with equal precision. No words were necessary. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Astrid and her selected operators to their classified mission, a brief flashback illuminated what had brought her here. Astrid moving through smoke and gunfire in a Myanmar jungle, calling coordinates while dragging wounded teammates to safety, never flinching despite her own injuries. The image dissolved back to present day. Commander Astrid Sale's face as she looked down at the training facility growing smaller beneath them. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction at having proven herself, only the quiet resolve of someone who had always known her worth, regardless of others' recognition. In the command center, Admiral Hargrove found Colonel Reinhardt reviewing training protocols at his desk, working awkwardly with his non-dominant hand around the constraints of his caste. Interesting reading, Colonel, she asked, echoing his earlier question to Astrid. Revising our hand-to-hand combat curriculum, he replied without looking up. Seems we've been missing some key elements in our joint manipulation techniques. Hargrove smiled slightly. I'm sure Commander Clav would be happy to provide input when her current operation concludes. I've already submitted the request through proper channels, Reinhardt said, finally meeting her gaze, along with a commendation for her actions yesterday. That's unusually generous given the circumstances. Reinhardt glanced at his broken arm. Let's just say I've gained a new perspective on effective training methodologies, Admiral. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from unexpected sources. Indeed they do, Colonel. Hargrove nodded approvingly. Indeed they do. On the helicopter, one of the newly selected operators, Enan Ramirez, approached Astrid with a caution of someone still adjusting to his new reality. Commander, permission to ask a question? Astrid nodded her assent. When did you select us? I mean, how early in your observation period did you know which candidates you wanted? Day 3, Astrid replied simply. Then why stay 3 more weeks? Astrid considered him thoughtfully before answering. Because watching how you performed when you didn't know you were being evaluated told me more than any test ever could. Ramirez absorbed this, then ventured one more question. And Colonel Reinhardt was breaking his arm part of the plan. For the first time, Astrid's expression softened into something approaching amusement. No, Ensign, that was just an unexpected training opportunity for both of us. The helicopter continued its journey toward their next mission, leaving the Naval Special Warfare Training Command transformed in ways that extended far beyond the broken arm of its commanding officer. In those halls and training grounds, the legend of Commander Astrid Clave was already taking shape. Not as the Pentagon bureaucrat they had dismissed, but as the silent professional who had walked among them, seeing their true potential when they could not see hers. And in the years that followed, whenever a new class of SEAL candidates arrived at the facility, they would eventually hear the story of the female officer who shattered Colonel Reinhardt's arm in front of 300 witnesses, and how that moment of perfect violence had revealed the truth about judgment, appearance, and the quiet heroes who move through the world unrecognized until the moment their skills are most needed. Subscribe to my channel, The Ordinary Heroes.